Things are really heating up again as the Houthis resume attacks against Israel. The IDF resumes the war in Gaza in full force and also gives Hamas an ultimatum that includes possible annexation of Gaza. I'm Ben Hilton, and this is the Israel Guys. At 2:10 a.m. yesterday morning, Hamas woke up to quite the shock. After nearly 2 months of negotiations with Israel and squandered opportunities by Hamas, Israel threw in the towel and launched a huge offensive in Gaza again. In fact, many Hamas commanders probably didn't even know the operation had begun again, as they were vaporized in their sleep. Israel hit around 80 Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets in the first 10 minutes of the attack, and a large percentage of those attacks happened in the first 2 minutes. Attacks continued to come in waves throughout the day, targeting mid-level Hamas commanders and some senior commanders as well. Around 8 a.m. in the morning, the IDF Arabic spokesman sent out a message to Gazans ordering them to relocate further into Gaza, away from the border with Israel for their own safety. This would create a combat zone around the border that would include around 1/3 of Gaza. There are reports that with the large-scale Hamas and PIJ recruitment effort that has been happening during this most recent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, that Hamas forces are up to around 25,000 terrorists now, and PIJ forces are up to about 5,000. So far, even though Israel is saying that a land invasion yet again may be possible, there hasn't been a large-scale call-up of Israeli reserves yet, which may indicate that a ground invasion isn't happening anytime soon. Although, that being said, there was just a news flash right before I started recording this show today that said the IDF tanks were spotted by Gazans moving into the Netzarim corridor in the Gaza Strip. So, developments may be happening faster than we think. All of this is happening with the careful consideration of preserving the lives of the 20 to 24 hostages still held in Gaza. And on that note, Israel just issued a very interesting threat to Hamas, which just might change the entire landscape of what is happening between Israel and Gaza. But before I talk about that, there's some really interesting notes about timing for all of this. Reports are indicating that this surprise attack that Israel just did on Hamas in Gaza was carefully coordinated with the United States in the U.S.'s attack on the Houthis. Basically, the idea is that if Israel attacks Gaza at the same time as the U.S. is carrying out their long-anticipated attack on the Houthis, then the Houthis wouldn't have much of an opportunity to attack Israel in response to the Gaza offensive. This seemed to have worked to a certain extent, as the Houthis weren't able to carry out any kind of large-scale retaliation attack on Israel so far. They did manage to send a threat and one ballistic missile towards Israel. They announced on X yesterday, the Yemeni people will not leave Gaza alone. The Zionists will pay for their crimes against the children and women and civilians. The missile the Houthis fired was dangerous enough to trigger air raid sirens in Israel's Negev area, but Israel was able to intercept it no problem before it crossed into Israeli airspace. Israel's Mogen David Adom medical response group said that there weren't any reports of injuries due to the missile attack. What's interesting with all of this, though, is that even though Yemen is doing their best to resume hostilities with Israel over the Gaza offensive, Iran's other proxies aren't doing anything at all. The militias in Iraq and Hezbollah both have been condemning the attacks in Gaza, but haven't been threatening a response to those attacks at all, which shows what their current capabilities actually are. Hezbollah, thank God, it seems is no longer in any kind of a position to harm the state of Israel for now, and that right there is an amazing development. We'll get into Israel's ultimatum that they just issued to Hamas in a minute, but first, take a look at this video.
All right, guys, this is the first annual Israel Summit hosted by the Israel Guys. Who's glad to be here?
It's much easier to get the settlers out of the West Bank than get the Jews out of Judea.
He blesses through the Jewish people in the land, being the blessing to all families on earth.
Jerusalem is the center. Jerusalem is the heart.
Never again is now. We need to act. Now it's never again.
What is the hope? What is my messianic vision? understand that there can't be a two-state solution, right? Even if you don't believe in anything, you understand that God is right.
We're not saying it's not enough to just have peace now. No, Israel can be the safest country in the world.
So, Channel 12 News in Israel just dropped a report last night. According to them, Israel has conveyed an ultimatum to Hamas saying that they will officially annex parts of the Gaza Strip to Israeli territory if any harm comes to any more of the hostages. This also comes as Netanyahu announced that any further negotiations with Hamas will happen under fire. Israel will not halt the war again to talk with Hamas, as this has proven to be completely futile so far, as Hamas uses the talks as an excuse to catch their breath and reorganize, as we just talked about with Hamas recruiting 25,000 more terrorists during this most recent 2-month ceasefire with Israel. I think Israel's threat of annexation is one of the best moves that they could make at this point. If Hamas is going to hold Israel over a barrel with the hostages, they must feel some pressure in return. And if Israel begins annexing Gaza one neighborhood at a time, it puts very real pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. Really, it's their worst case scenario. This continues to be a very complicated situation. If Hamas hadn't taken the hostages on October 7th, this war would have been much easier for Israel. But people take hostages for a reason. It's highly effective, and every move Israel has made in this war has had to have been carefully weighed on the scale of wanting desperately to bring their people home safely. You can see the difference between how Israel fights a war with hostages versus Israel's fighting a war without, with Hezbollah. Israel was facing a much more formidable enemy with Hezbollah in Lebanon than they were with Hamas, but because Hezbollah wasn't holding hostages, thank God, Israel was able to quite neatly defeat them with seemingly little effort, to the point where, as I pointed out earlier, Hezbollah isn't even threatening retaliation at all anymore for Israel's most recent surprise attacks in Gaza. And despite the complications, thankfully, so far, Israel has been very successful in bringing many of the hostages home from Gaza, while at the same time inflicting enormous damage on Hamas. And with every hostage they get out, they are able to operate a little bit more easily, a little bit more smoothly, a little bit more safely against Hamas in Gaza. Although this war is taking a huge financial toll on Israel. According to figures released by Israel's finance minister on Monday, defense spending for 2024 is reaching close to 170 billion shekels, or $46 billion so far, which for a country of just under 10 million people is a lot of money. This and a slowdown of trade as a direct result of the war have massively driven up the cost of living in Israel, making day-to-day life for Israelis much more difficult. Israel needs to end this war as quickly as possible, eradicating Hamas as a threat on their southern border so that they can return a peaceful existence to Israel once again. Israel's been through hell in the last couple of years and in some ways continues to be there. We need to pray like never before for God to deliver Israel from her enemies, to restore peace to the people of Israel once again. Guys, make sure to check out our Israel Summit coming up in June. The link is in the description below. Also, please consider supporting our work here at The Israel Guys. If you'd like to do that, head over to our website, theisraelguys.com/donate. The link is also below. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Get the conversation going down below in the comments. Share this video if you found it helpful with someone else. As always, stop listening to the lies and propaganda and connect with the truth of what is happening in Israel. We'll be back here soon here at The Israel Guys.